The third episode of Tales of a Walking Dead brings back a familiar face. If that is a face we are welcoming back, or if there is another matter at hand, I will happily share with you if you join me for this short review video. The third episode, titled D, brings back Alpha before she was Alpha and was still going by the name D as the title suggested. We also see her daughter Lydia, but here played by a younger actress because in this episode she is 9 years old. So the episode takes place after D has killed her husband and way before she led the Whisperers against our favorite group of survivors. The episode takes place on a riverboat where everyone who lives there apparently has to work his way up by doing chores and earning a position within the society, or at least that is what it looks like, because it was never really explained enough. Apparently, in the day everyone is working, while at night everyone is role-playing as if it was the 1900s. Dee and Lydia, being there over a year now, are already part of a society, even though Dee is not really fitting in, which I guess comes as no surprise to anyone. The leader of a group is Brooke, a woman who takes a growing place within Lydia's life, to the point that Dee feels threatened by her in her way. Because we know from previous episodes in the main show, and are also reminded in this episode, only Alpha, or here Dee, can protect Lydia, and no one else will ever be able to. Only she can keep her alive. The newest member on board is Billy, who yet has to work his way up and therefore is tasked with playing the barkeeper in the evening, not yet allowed to partake in the more comfortable parts of a roleplay. However, Dee is very suspicious of him and believes him to be in contact with outside people trying to take over the boat. Of course, nobody is believing her because she is acting so strange her own. So with us knowing that she will in the future become one of the worst villain ever, who will be the villain in this episode? If you like this episode or not depends largely on the fact if you think of Alpha as being one of the greatest enemies in the show or one of the less interesting. Personally, for me, she never was the most interesting villain in the show. That honor goes to the governor, I would say, and I would have much rather seen an episode about the governor coming into office, for which they could even have used a complete novel that was written about him. So maybe Scott M. Gimple, that might be an idea for a complete miniseries. But let's get back to this episode. Just because I think she is not the most interesting villain of them all, doesn't mean that the episode couldn't be good. I was going into the episode though thinking, what is there left to see? Because in the main show we have seen her demise. Also there in flashbacks we have seen how she first got rid of her husband, clearly showcasing that she had psychological issues from the get-go, which are added here by us learning that she had to kill her own father when she was 9. Something that obviously will leave a mark. We also had seen some flashbacks about her meeting and finding Beta for the first time. So I thought, what else is there to tell us? What we ended up with is a new chapter in Alpha's saga, where we can see her slowly slipping deeper and deeper into her psychosis, which leads to her being the person we meet in the main series years later. If this is something we needed to see, depends on, like I said before, if you're interested in her. For everyone who is a big fan of the character, I guess this episode is a very special treat. For everyone else, it is interesting enough to keep watching and find out more about one of the villain's backstory. What I didn't like that much though is the means of making her also the narrator of a story. Speaking to us from the off, explaining a lot of stuff that did not really need to be explained, not adding much to the overall story and the experience the show brings us. This is until the very end, and I will not spoil that here, where it actually becomes meaningful, but at that point also felt like a cheap cash grab. I will give more details on that in a very short edition of the spoiler zone later on in this video. So let's get to the rating. It was a very good episode, and no matter if it was needed or not, it was entertaining and gave us some nice insights into that character that we have only seen through the lens of being the main villain. It doesn't add much more to the character of Lydia that we didn't already know, but that is, I guess, the reason why this episode is called D and not D/Lydia, which was the first thing that I thought about when reading the title. I guess if I would have liked the character more, or if there was more to be told that really was important enough to warrant to be told, then I might have scored this episode higher. But this way I'm giving it the very solid 7 out of 10 points. Because as you know, scoring a show, an episode or a movie is always a subjective matter. So now, if you don't want to get spoiled but enjoyed this video so far, please like it now before you leave. And if you are no subscriber yet, maybe consider to change that. If you don't mind spoilers or have already watched this episode, then please follow me into the spoiler zone. Okay, I promised to make it a short spoiler zone, so let's try to stick with that. Even though I guess everyone expected her to be the villain, of course Billy turned out to be the villain in this episode, who brings his group mates on board and kills everyone who he thinks might take a place they are not worthy of. Not being a fan of Dee and Lydia, of course he tries to kill them first, but Dee already smelled the rat and started her own counterattack, which basically leads into a massacre where everyone from one group fights the other, leading to practically everyone dying. Later, Dee runs into Brooke, and on request from Lydia, she is not killing her, which was her first impulse. So yes, villain being pretty much already in place there. But instead, unbeknownst to Lydia, she is scarring Brooke with a knife by slashing her right across her face, because she knows exactly how proud Brooke was of her looks. So also her level of cruelty was already there and was only refined by leading the Whisperers later on. Regarding the twist though that I pointed out that really makes it important that Dee is the narrator from the off, who also appears to be on screen sometimes, telling us the story. At the very end of the episode, we see them running into the Whisperers, or at least the precursor of them as we know them from the original show. The iteration here seems to be still very much human, and they're still using their original names, and they are only using the masks, I feel, to stay hidden among the dead. There is no religious cult or anything else going on that is comparable to what Alpha brings to the game later on. The leader of those early Whisperers introduces herself as Hera, and Alpha's narration tells us that she was in some kind of a romantic relationship with Hera going forward, but ultimately ended in her killing Hera and taking her face to become the mask we know her wearing for the entire run of her appearances in the main show. And the cheap cash grab I meant was that this pretty much sets up either a continuation of the story or maybe even her own property that was just being set up this way. And again, it might be only me feeling that way because I'm not the greatest fan of that character to begin with, so I'm not that thrilled about the prospect of seeing more of her. Even though, and I need to bring that home as well, I really appreciate Samantha Morton's acting, and it has nothing to do with her as an actor. It's just the character that I did not really enjoy that much. And I guess the reason is because there is so little humanity left in her, to the point that she doesn't even feel human anymore, and a villain who is not human anymore is just not that interesting to me. And honestly, it also doesn't help to diminish Alpha's worth in regards of the Whisperers, because we always assumed that she was the one actually establishing the Whisperers, creating them, building the group based on her own ideas, which is now diminished to the fact that she basically just took over a group and idea that was brought to her attention by someone saving her and her daughter. So inadvertently, the creators of this show have actually diminished her character a little bit instead of extending on it, at least in my view. What do you think about Alpha? Are you a fan of her character, or do you also think that she is overrated in the gallery of villains when it comes to The Walking Dead? Are you happy with the episode, or would you have preferred something else? Was it a welcome comeback for you? Let me know in the comments. So much for now, see you next time, and thanks for watching.